Be patient then, brothers and sisters, until the Lord's coming. See how the farmer waits for the land to yield its valuable crop, patiently waiting for the autumn and spring rains. You too be patient and stand firm, because the Lord's coming is near. Don't grumble against one another, brothers and sisters, or you will be judged. The judge is standing at the door. Brothers and sisters, as an example of patience in the face of suffering, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. As you know, we count as blessed those who have persevered. You have heard of Job's perseverance and have seen what the Lord finally brought about. The Lord is full of compassion and mercy. Above all, my brothers and sisters, do not swear, not by heaven or by earth or by anything else. All you need to say is a simple yes or no, otherwise you will be condemned. May God bless his words, and I'll welcome Andrew to come and teach us. Thank you.
Well, it's good to be back with you. It's back in January, actually, I preached two sermons from James chapter 1. I've recycled those and preached them elsewhere because I enjoyed them. If you didn't, I enjoyed them a lot. I got Tony's email a couple of weeks back and said, Tony, you're desperate, I can come. So here I am. You must have been desperate. I'm preaching for you again. This passage, I felt like perhaps could have recycled that first sermon, because that was about being patient and persevering in suffering. But I couldn't, because there's something else going on here. But James chapter 1 verse 2, count it pure joy when you face trials of many kinds. That has a real theme that comes back, doesn't it? And James there said, trials lead to perseverance, perseverance leads to maturity, maturity leads to a crown. Wonderful promise of what's to come when God's working in us. And then James said, ask for wisdom. Anyone you lacked wisdom, ask for wisdom. And God, who gives generously without finding fault, will give you wisdom. That verse has thankfully stuck with me. That God gives generously without finding fault. And we need to receive from such a God, don't we? And I think the key verse for understanding James in entirety is James chapter 1 verse 8, about not being double-minded, but being solid right through Christians. And actually Psalm 86 had that thing. I don't want to devise his heart, Lord. So this, whatever we read in James, we're thinking, how are we going to be solid right through, really authentic Christians? As we come to this passage tonight in James chapter 5, we need more wisdom, don't we, to be solid right through Christians. And James is going to give us some more wisdom. Like all good preachers, they always tell you what another translation has, don't they? That shows that they've done their research. And I'm going to do that not just for the sake of sounding like I've done my research, but the James 5 verse 7, if you had the New King James version, would start with therefore. And whenever you see therefore in a passage, you need to say, what is it there for? And it's always linking. So James here is linking what he's told us in chapter 5, verses 1 to 6, to this present part. So I couldn't ignore that. The NIV is kind of smoothed out, but then is the third word. But therefore is at the start. So we must link back to what James said in 5 verses 1 to 6. I don't know how that sermon went for me. It's a powerful passage, isn't it? Verse 3 said, you rich oppressors have hoarded wealth in the last days. So that talks about the division in society, and it talks about the coming of the end of the age. And he says, you fattened yourselves in the day of slaughter. I've got to say, if you hear that passage, you've got to think, Lord, I don't want to be one of those people. Protect me from being a rich oppressor. Trustful. But James does, when he moves from verse 6 into verse 7, he turns his attention back to believers. We know that because in verse 7 he says brothers and sisters. Verse 9, verse 10, and verse 12 is brothers and sisters. So James is now writing to believers about believers, away from the rich oppressors to the brothers and sisters. So we must always be careful to think, who is the writer writing to or about this? It's for us, brothers and sisters. And he tells us, first off, that we will have trouble, we will have suffering in this present time because of this world that is run by those who are rich oppressors. I read once that under capitalism, man exploits his fellow man, whereas under communism, it's the other way around. Whoever's in charge exploits those who are not in charge. And that just perhaps strikes a bell with you, doesn't it? I don't know how your week's been, how your life experience in the workplace has been, but the world is not as it should be. We know that it's a broken world, it's a fallen world, and we must be patient in that world that is not as it should be. We need wisdom to be patient when it comes from living in this fallen world, but not part of this world, to have a correct perspective. We need once again to sort out our thinking of how we live in this fallen world. And James is going to give us 3 examples to give us an all-round correct view of life, the universe, and everything. So my first point is we should understand today in the light of eternity. Understand today in the light of eternity. So James 5 verses 7 and 8. Be patient then, brothers and sisters, until the Lord's coming. See how the farmer waits for the land to yield its valuable, patiently waiting for the autumn and spring rains. You too be patient and stand firm, because the Lord's coming is near. So how can we be patient in this unjust world where the rich grow richer and the gap between rich and poor grows ever wider? How can we endure hardship with patience? Well, we endure by setting our minds on eternity, and we endure by making an active decision. This patience isn't just something that some people have as their personality and other people don't have. Some people are ginger hair, therefore I'm short-tempered. You can't expect me to be patient. No, James is calling us to make a decision of the will. Once again, the underlying word there for patient is not passive. The most literal translation that I regularly use. It says the farmer waits, being patient. There's an active patience, which doesn't sound quite right, is it? But this wisdom of patience is not laziness. It's not mañana. It is an active patience. Now, of course, farming has advanced massively since James wrote, but it's still basically the same, isn't it? In the spring, the fields are ploughed, the crop is planted, and in the autumn, the harvest comes in. It's the same as it's been for millennia, really. And James tells us that in the spring, the farmer waits patiently for the spring. When it comes, it softens the ground, it's easier to plough. The seed, when it falls on that ground, will be successful. If you're an impatient gardener, I'm an impatient gardener. And I think, well, there's the bit at the back of the packet, it tells me when to put the seed in the ground. You know, I fancy having the crop a bit earlier. So I'm going to plant my radish a bit earlier than it says. And there, when everybody else is waiting, I'll be crunching that sharp, I like it, peppery refreshingness. But it didn't work. All I've got is wasted crop and wasted time. I didn't wait patiently to start. And then we put the crop in at the right time. Perhaps we were wise, perhaps we were patient like the farmer. And the seed goes in, the sun shines, the rain comes, and shortly before the harvest, the late rains come, which James refers to. The late rain comes and it swells the fruit in the ground, so there'll be good stuff to eat. Patient farmer will wait. Patient farmer waits for the late rain to do its work before bringing in the valuable crop. So we're to wait. It's a lovely image, isn't it? What does it mean for us, James? What does it mean for us? Well, it means we need to recognise that what's being worked out in this world is actually being governed by a higher authority. We need to realise, as we live in this world, that our lives are under sovereign care. That God is filtering through their estimates all that comes in to our lives. Just as the farmer has to work with the seasons, not waiting but not rushing, or waiting but not rushing. So the believer must understand what is happening in this world. The believer must understand what's happening in our life. And we have to see everything that happens in our life in the light of one event, one key event, and that key event is yet to come. In the verse 8, because the Lord's coming is near. At the Lord's coming, we will be vindicated. At the Lord's coming, all the evil that's happened, all the oppression that's happened, those rich people who are fattening themselves for the slaughter, the judgment will come. And Jesus will be glorified and we will be vindicated. So we need to understand our times. I mean, all of us grew up in the second Elizabethan period, didn't we? We've now moved into the Carolean period. Nobody even talks about it, do they? It's so hard to pronounce. But now Charles is king. It's currently the new Carolean period. We live in a world of tech giants where data is the new oil. But the real biblical history period we are living in is the last days. We live between Christ's ascension to glory and Christ's return. A small band of followers saw him leave 2,000 years ago. Everyone will know when he returns. There will be no doubt. But after 2,000 years, we are still waiting, aren't we? And we are waiting in the knowledge of it being near. Impatient waiting. It's a stark reminder, isn't it, to actually wait for something. Not all of us have waited 2,000 years, of course. But it feels hard to make ourselves remember that it is near. It's not happened yet, but it is near. Think about the Old Testament. Do you read Jesus doing all those marvellous things? And you're thinking, you've waited thousands of years. You people have heard for thousands of years this is coming, and you missed it. Well, we won't miss the second coming, of course. But it's just as certain as the incarnation. Just as certain. So we wait patiently, actively using the knowledge that Christ's return is near, to bear with the way the world is, to bear with the injustice of humanity's system. So the command is given in verse 8 to stand firm. Again, the New King James Version has that, establish your hearts. So as we wait, we stand firm. As we wait, we establish our heart. Another version, strengthen your heart. Our heart is the centre of our being. It's the thing from which the issues of life come out, flow out from the heart. And our heart is to be the firm foundation on which we build our lives on Christ. Its course is set by the reality. As we apply this verse, the reality that the second coming is coming, that the Lord's return is soon. So we should live our lives in the light of that. We've got a family relative who, as a teenager, lost his father. 2 weeks later, the bailiffs knocked at the door. They expressed their condolences to the widow and then served the eviction notice. That has shaped that man's life such that he has always worked hard, always worked for money, and always been relatively careful with his money. Shaped his life. Our heart direction and resolve is going to be shaped, should be shaped by a major event. the major event in salvation history tonight. Everything that's been promised, everything that the prophets prophesied, has happened except Christ's return. We believe all the stuff that's happened. We need to hang on, look forward to what has been told and is not yet. Our joys and our sorrows need to be seen in the future light, that Christ is coming, and he's coming soon. And James has built up a sense of urgency in this chapter. Verse 3, he talked about the last days. Verse 7, he tells us to live in the knowledge of the certain return of the Lord is coming. And verse 9, he comes back to it. Verse 9, he's telling us actually not to be impatient. So it's possible that as we wait, we could be impatient in waiting. And we see again the dangers of the time. James set out the dangers of the time. He's gone back to that various times through the book. James chapter 5, verse 9. Do not grumble against one another, brothers and sisters, or you will be judged. The judge is standing at the door. So James is weaving in again this idea of controlling the tongue. Chapter 1, verse 26, it tells us to tight rein on our tongues. Chapter 3, verse 8, no man can tame the tongue. It's a restless evil, full of deadly poison. And now we are once again called to control our tongue, not grumbling against one another. In these last days, as we live together as brothers and sisters, we are not to grumble against each other. I don't know what you think about in this impatient waiting. You think about those long car journeys with the kids? Anyone had those? Perhaps you will remember the ones when you were the kid, and more recently the ones where the kids were in the back. You know, you started out, some of those journeys the kids were excited. It was holiday time, or they were going to go and see the cousins that were their favourite cousins they hadn't seen them for months and years. Sometimes the journey was an unpleasant necessity. You know, as the stuffy relatives, you know, sitting on comfortable chairs, eat dry cake and make an uncomfortable conversation, and the parents are just hoping the children. Whichever the journey is, the potential for quarrelling is there, isn't it? And every mile that goes on, the potential for quarrelling in the back seats just increases. And the grumbling and the quarrelling doesn't make the car journey any shorter. It just makes the car journey more unbearable for everyone. Well, James, parents then perhaps try and bring order, don't they? What do you do when the kids are grumbling in the back? You either throw them more sweets to get them more hyper, or you bring in a punishment. Don't make me turn this car around. It's like the kids are going to see the relatives anyway. What threat is that? Well, where do we see Christ in this verse? Did you notice the end of the verse? He said, the judge is at the door. Remember that urgency of the second coming. The judge is at the door, or the judge is at the gates of the city. The courtroom door will open. The court will rise as the judge comes in, and the judge will hand out judgment. The injustices committed by the rich oppressors, the heavenly judge will judge those. The ones who fatten themselves for slaughter will get their comeuppance, and we think, hooray, we cheer at that, don't we? That's good. This upside down world will be put right by the judge. I love that. But actually, verse 9, James is writing to believers. So as we get to verse 9, this scene here, brothers and sisters grumbling to each other, we need to cut that out because the judge is at the door. And judgment is certain. In Acts chapter 17, verse 13, look it up, Paul is in Athens, it says, for he has set a day when he will judge the world with justice. He has given proof of this to all men by raising him from the dead. So we've got that resurrection to judgment, the two bookends, if you like, in which we live. But what judgment still remains for believers? Judgment still remains for brothers and sisters. Well, it's not condemnation, is it? The wounds of Christ, we say, once condemned, but now set free. That's a glorious thing. But the judgment here is scrutiny of what we've done as believers. Jesus will come back and judge. And will he find us to have been grumblers? Find us to have been ones who've perhaps caused some dissension and hurt with our tongues as we lived amongst brothers and sisters? James will come back to it in verse 12. But as joint heirs of Christ, our older brother, we must live out the love that he called us to and show us. I love sermons with illustrations. James gives us 3, so I don't need to make any of my own up. Second illustration then is verse 10, and just going to go to the start of verse 11. And here I want us to understand human opposition in the light of history. Understand today's trials in the light of eternity. Understand human opposition in the light of history. James 5 verse 10. Brothers and sisters, as an example of patience in the face of suffering, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. As you know, we count as blessed those who are persecuted. In this second example, James puts his emphasis on suffering, which wasn't quite there before. It was just the way that life is. He has it by a narrow reason for the believers suffering, not just because we are part of a broken world, but because we speak out in the name of the Lord. In church history, is full of those who have spoken out for the Lord and suffered for it. We could think of, well, one of the most famous prophets in the Old Testament, Elijah, Mount Carmel, that tremendous victory when God judged by fire, let the God who answers by fire be God. Amazing demonstration of God's power and authority, and the people shouted, the Lord, he is God. The very next chapter, Queen Jezebel threatens to kill that very same day. So, God's prophet, vindicated, speaking bravely, and threatened by those who should have known better. Stephen, the first Christian martyr, in his speech to the Sanhedrin, that collection of the Jewish leaders, he says to them, you are thick-necked. And Acts chapter 7, verse 50. Was there ever a prophet your father did not persecute? They even killed those who predicted the claim of the righteous one. And now you have betrayed and murdered him. The only logical response to being faced with that history is to repent. But the actual response is to stone Stephen. This is the history that James points out. But these days, there may be various responses to our message. Perhaps the most common response is indifference, isn't it? A shrug of the shoulders. That's great for you. Indifference, rejection, perhaps hostility and persecution. But the correct response for us, the right response for us, James tells us, is patience. Following that great tradition of the prophets and the others who've held out the word of God despite suffering, in patience. We are to understand human opposition in the light of the prophets. We are to expect opposition. Just as Jesus was opposed, so we will be opposed, as the servant is not present. The third illustration that James brings out is Job. So I want us to understand the devil's opposition in the light of God's sovereign love. That's our third point. And James 5, verse 11. As you know, we count as blessed those who are persecuted. You have heard of Job's perseverance and have seen what the Lord finally brought about. The Lord is full of compassion and mercy. So we've seen the farmer being patient in the trials of life. We've seen the prophets being patient in the face of opposition, speaking. With Job, there's a different thing going on, because there was that strange transaction in heaven that we're given insight to. Job chapter 1. The devil, Satan, is there in heaven. We don't know how this happens. But he says, does Job fear God for nothing? Of course he's faithful to you. Look how much you've blessed him. All those good things you've given to him. Satan was given power to test Job's faith. That power was limited, but within the limited power, he lost just about everything, didn't he? I've not had the best week, but it's nothing of a week compared to your family, your wealth, and your health, all going in what appears to be a bad time. But Job faced further anguish when his comforters came. There were no comfort at all. And then the temptation of his wife saying, curse God. But Job's faith and Job's patience stood the test. Job 2 verse 10 tells us, when his wife said, curse God, he replies, you are talking like a foolish woman. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble? In all this, Job did not sin. He said. Job did not sin, he said. And James told us, look at what the Lord brought about. So what did the Lord bring about in Job's life? By the end of the book of Job, chapter 42, verse 12. What did the Lord bring about? The Lord blessed the latter part of Job's life, all four parts. All that material stuff plus more. Family, again. Friends, again. Honour in society, again. This wasn't payback on a project. This wasn't the take some pain to get some gain. This wasn't the prize for passing the test of faith. That he had new flocks, new herds, and whatever. And the real blessing for Job was not the stuff. It was not the family, but it was the deeper knowledge of God. It was knowing in that very deep, that very personal way, that the Lord is full of compassion and mercy. We saw that in Psalm 86. It's a recurring theme, Exodus 34. After the golden calf, when the people have committed idolatry, the Lord reveals himself to Moses, passes before him, and he identifies himself as compassionate and full of mercy. So we recognise that whatever is happening in our lives, the Lord is compassionate and full of mercy. Job had no insight into the transaction between God and Satan. But Job knew that the Lord was full of compassion. And that was enough. That was enough for him to keep on trusting. That was enough for him to say he should accept the good things and not the hard providences. Under the Lord's sovereign hand, winter is followed by spring. Pruning is followed by growth. Under his hand, loss should lead to hope. Job had that hope fulfilled during this lifetime, in part, but only fulfilled in part. Those hardships we're facing, we may only find them fulfilled in a complete and perfect way in the next part. But we should hang on, we should hold on. One of the commentaries I read, the man writing it said about an old believer. Church is blessed with good old brothers and sisters. It's really blessed. And this old believer had failing health. He asked, how is your health? The response was, nothing like a good resurrection. How about that? Nothing like a good resurrection will not cure. So you see, Job, it's great to think about Job, but actually Job's a very intimidating problem. So I don't want to change. Because I'm not sure I can hold on to them. But the whole of the Old Testament is pointing to Jesus. And Job points to Jesus. Hebrews chapter 12, verses 2 and 3. This is just a couple of pages back. So flick back to Hebrews chapter 12, verses 2 and 3. So fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author or the pioneer and perfecter of faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. And there we have the one who's paid the price for our sins, who brings the providence into our lives through a heart that is pure love, and as an example for us to follow on. So far, we have seen that we should be patient while we wait. We need a life that is shaped by the future, a life that is shaped by the fact that Christ will soon return. And as we wait, we're patient like the farmer, as we prepare the crop, see what God is working. We are patient like the prophets, holding out the word of life, knowing the opposition. We're patient like Job, suffering but knowing the Lord is full of compassion and mercy. Patient as the Lord works in us to make us mature and complete, to make us solid and through Christians. Now, I'd have been in the sermon there, but totally getting quite something I didn't realise. You said earlier this is your last evening. Didn't realise I was going to be here for your last evening. It's quite something. Verse 12, though, we have that. How does that fit in? There's some argument, does it fit in with these verses or with the following verses? Let's look at it now. Verse 12. Above all, my brothers and sisters, do not swear, not by heaven or by earth or by anything else. All you need to say is a simple yes or no. Otherwise, you will be condemned. Now, that word above all can make us think this is the priority. This is the most important thing I'm saying. Actually, what he's saying is, I'm winding this up now. So, here's my closing thoughts as I start. He's already mentioned the royal laws. This above the royal law to love one as Christ has loved us. There is a strong link as he talks about the use of the tongue here. That when we say be yes and no, don't need to swear at him, just be honest. Link back to verse 9, not grumbling, how we use our tongue. Link back to verse 9, which says the judge is at the door. Here, you will be condemned. So there's clear links there. And there's a link, of course, to the bigger thing of James, that we are to be mature and complete. Those solid right Christians. And our speech is important in that. So the question is, do we never swear an oath? Is it never right to swear an oath? Should a Christian, if they're in court as a witness, refuse to swear an oath? Yes will be yes, no will be no. I don't think it is saying that. The Old Testament gives provision for us to take oaths, and Paul himself in Philippians says, as God is my witness. So Paul himself does it, so it's okay. But really what James is saying is you should be trusted. Everything you do and say, you should be trusted. If you talk about mundane things, you should be trusted. When you talk about spiritual things, you should be trusted. So we can swear an oath, but it's a provision, not a requirement that we have to do something we can't do. Why did God allow people to swear oaths? Well, it was because people were dishonest. Basically, it was about weakness in humanity that meant we could say, this you can take seriously. Now, as it came to the time of Jesus on earth, the Jewish leaders had really caused a perversion in terms of the swearing of oaths. They were very squeamish about using the Lord's name, as they wouldn't swear an oath on the Lord's name. If they look back to Deuteronomy, that's how you were meant to swear. But they had this hierarchy of oaths. You'll see this when Jesus deals with leaders, and it's reflected here in Jesus. So these hierarchy of oaths are just like a dodgy contract clause that tries to wiggle out of things. So if somebody said to you, I swear by the temple, that wasn't binding. If they said, I swear by the gold in the temple, that was binding. You can navigate that. And Jesus called out the leaders. He said, whatever you do, you are bound. So if you swear by the temple, he said, you swear by everything in it. If you swear, as they were in the habit of doing, by heaven, then if you swear by heaven, that includes the throne and the one who sits on it. So you are bound. Jesus said there is not two levels of truth. Just like now there is not two levels of truth. If you say on my mother's grave, it shouldn't be any more serious. You say, And my favourite, actually, I've had this in the workplace. Somebody says, I'm not going to lie to you. And I think, well, I don't really trust you now. And that's the problem, isn't it? We shouldn't have to pull on any of this, because there shouldn't be two levels of truth. There is what I say, and what I say is true. Plain, straightforward. I don't need to appeal to an oath. That's required to just a straightforward yes. And giving our word will sometimes mean we need to pay the price for giving our word. It could be a cost to keep the promise that we made to the boss, to the spouse, to the children, to the church. And a promise, a word that comes with a price. We should also elevate our understanding of God when we think about this speaking the truth. Because we speak always in the presence of God. There is a little Latin phrase, coram Deo, that we speak in the presence of God. So we speak under his authority, and we speak for his glory. Knowing this should increase our reverence for him, and we should always delight in being truthful. We should be careful how we speak to each other. Into a conclusion here. Bearing in mind verse 9, we are not to grumble against each other. Acknowledging chapter 3, verse 8, the tongue is a restless evil. When we are together in church, brothers and sisters, then we need to be very careful with the use of the tongue. Being truthful, not grumbling. Avoiding those exaggerations that cause division. I've told you a million times to avoid those exaggerations. And I need to tell you a million times because you always do this. Those hot-headed things, the number of church divisions and splits that would have been stopped if people had had control of the tongue. So that's one application for us. And finally, in conclusion, I want to just say that we are children of a compassion, which we saw in Germany. We must speak the truth in love, and we do that as we wait patiently for the Lord's coming. So, children of compassionate and merciful God, speaking the truth in love. We wait patiently, and we'll sing together. I've got a note somewhere. You know, don't you?